Hello, this is John Nagarjuna Anhalt, and I'm going to be doing a small stakes session video for you. This is going to be 50 no limit and 100 no limit 6 max. Going to be using specific hands and going through a lot of different concepts and ideas about how to scoop small pots, make plays, re-steal, and how to think about a lot of situations to really maximize your value. You hopefully should learn a good deal from this video. There might be some concepts that you're somewhat familiar with. I hope I can break those down in more detail and make them more clear for you. Um, so really everything in poker comes down to maximizing every opportunity that you can find and doing it. One of the major differences between marginal winning players and somewhat decent players to the good players is really capitalizing on all of those opportunities that are at the table. Um, and in order to do that, you need to, of course, know what those opportunities are. You need to be able to recognize them and be able to find them. And in order to do that, you need to be able to pay attention and be actively looking for them all the time. No matter how many tables you're playing, um, I typically play around 6 or 7 tables at a time. Um, when these hands are done, they're done with only 4 tables at a time. But regardless, you should be able to find some kind of comfort zone for yourself to maximize uh, all of these potential opportunities come up because they come up a lot. And I can just say from having coached for many years, a lot of small and mid-stakes players, that there's a lot of spots that people miss constantly. Um, and so with that, since we're going to be going over a lot of different ideas, maybe some things, like I said, that you uh, have already kind of heard of and do, and some things that you may have never have thought about or tried. Um, Bad variance in small samples can really equal some bad conclusions. You could try a bluff or a play and it doesn't work, and you'd be like, ah, that's never going to happen. So in order to avoid bad conclusions in poker, period, about no matter what you're doing, you want to keep experimenting, testing your conclusions, sharing hand histories, on forums or with your friends, talking about poker, making sure that the main thing is that you're recognizing the situation properly, and that you're executing. What happens because of that is somewhat irrelevant. Just the main point is that you want to make sure that you're recognizing the right spots and executing them properly. So to do this video, basically, I said I was going to play around 10,000 hands at 50 no limit, 100 no limit 6 max, and go over and replay different hands I thought were interesting and kind of share my thoughts on them. In small samples, you can easily have crazy win rates and whatever is going on. I posted my stats here that came out from the session, roughly about the same amount of 100 no limit and 50 no limit hands, a little bit more 100 no limit. And you can kind of get an idea of my stats and what I was playing. I would definitely say I was not playing really hyper aggressive because I think there's some downfall on that, but just really, again, kind of recognizing the situations that I could steal or could bluff, and capitalizing on those as much as possible. Um, Not for betting a ton, I would say. Uh, 3 betting a decent amount to a point where it's aggressive to possibly make somebody make some mistakes, but not over the top to where people can really exploit it. And yeah, so without further ado, we're going to go over a number of these hands now. Alright, so the first thing we're going to go over is kind of how to make distinctions and whether you should be flat calling or 3-betting a regular when a reg ISOs a fish and you have kind of a marginal but decent hand. So I thought this hand kind of illustrated one of these points, and I'll show you a different one here after this. But so here we obviously have the fish and we have the reg. who is going to ISO fairly wide here, trying to get heads up in position against the fish. We have King Jack. Um, so a couple of things that you should be considering when you're trying to determine if you want to flat call or three bet here. One is when you have like really kind of marginally bad hands that you're not really looking to play post flop, something maybe like a king seven suited or something. This is a great spot to re-steal, of course. Now with king jack, we're strong enough to be ahead of both of these players' ranges. The problem, of course, is that we're out of position to both players. Um, so I'm always a huge advocate of trying to keep the fish in the pot as much as possible, even if it means taking, a slight hit on pre-flop equity to keep the fish in there and possibly play a big pot with them. Um, this is usually a spot though that it's much better to three bet. Now a couple things you want to consider are really how aggressive post flop your reg is, who's ISOing, and also just your overall relative position. If we, for example, were on the button and the reg ISO'd from the cutoff, then flat calling here would be more ideal because you have a better chance of having position on the reg and the fish and still having a good hand that you're ahead of both of their ranges. And obviously when you have position, there's a whole lot more that you can do. But in this case, even though the reg isn't hugely or largely aggressive post flop, three betting here is nice to take down what is it, 7 or 8 big blinds without even seeing a flop. That's a good win. So that's the kind of the out of position scenario. But there are times where you can take a reasonable hand when you're close to 100 big blinds out of position and keep the fish in. Let's say maybe we had ace 10 suited or something like that, and your reg wasn't very aggressive post flop, then you could you know take more chances there pre-flop and just look to call. But in general, um, these kinds of hands are good to um, basically steal, and even on the lower end of your range, like I was saying, like a king seven suited or maybe like a queen nine suited or something along those lines as well. That would be very standard in that case. So here again is another similar example. Fish limps in, uh, pretty aggressive rig, ISOs, and you have queen seven here suited in the big blind. Definitely, since it's a hand that we're not looking to call and play post flop, we're looking mainly to steal pre flop. We re-raise and you can take down the pot. You just have to recognize and take advantage of those, and mainly do them with hands that when you are called you have something. So something with like a high card, ace king queen, would be nice if it's suited, king three suited or whatever. And not something, for example, like 8-3 offsuit or something to that effect. Technically if you really are confident you can do it with any two cards because you're mainly just looking to take it down. But if you do get called, you want something that has some kind of showdown value, especially if you're doing it out of position, because it's you know it's a lot harder to get to showdown. You want to be more confident if the higher pair that you make, the more likely you can make it to showdown safely. Or you have to be looking to mix in a lot of bluffs, and which can obviously become much more complex. So those are a couple of common examples, and we'll go into something else. All right, so similar pre-flop strategy you can take advantage of, three bet squeeze. You have a uh, regular who's a little bit too loose from early position, opening like 25% of their hands, and then kind of a fishy bad player calling, flat calling, you're on the button. With a hand like this, this is a pretty easy pot to take down a majority of the time, because clearly, obviously, your opener who's way too loose is going to have to call a large raise out of position, worry about maybe being out of position against two players, and thus the squeeze is pretty effective there. Squeezing on the button is a great play. You just want to make sure that the person opening from under the gun or the hijack has a really, a higher percentage from those positions. So I specifically in my HUD, I keep those two numbers up there because I squeeze a lot in the cutoff or button when I see these numbers get really green. So my range will get really, really wide here, and it's pretty effective. And also, just as a general strategy against regs, when you start three betting them in position, it can get quite frustrating, and you want to build that tension at the table so you could take advantage of it in later situations. Okay, so this one I kind of like to call BS leading into the pre-flop razor. I don't know. I found this a good amount at 50 no limit, a little less 100 no limit. This stuff doesn't usually happen at 200, 400, 600 no limit and stuff. So it's interesting seeing it, and I think it's pretty exploitable. But I'm sure you're familiar with this. And a lot of times, really actually an open button situation isn't the most ideal for this. But it does tend to happen a good amount, and I think at 50 no limit and under, you can take advantage of this a good amount. At least experiment with it and um, see how you like it. So, anyway, so you open the button, you get a call from some kind of bad player. Queen high, pretty dry flop overall, and you get let into for three-quarters of the pot. Usually, when people are leading here, they have air. Sometimes they're going to have a draw, but it kind of depends. I mean, some of the better players obviously are going to check raise on this kind of board with a draw. Um, but sometimes, it's bottom, middle pair. It's rarely top pair or better. If, sometimes you are going to run into that, of course, and there will be certain players that just bet, 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 and um, that's just part of the overall game strategy. But most of the time when you get led into like this, it's BS, and you can do yourself a favor by just you make a really small raise. Don't have to risk too much to get folds in this scenario. And it's most ideal when you have something with like a backdoor draw or an overcard. In this case, I have two backdoor draws, backdoor straight draw, backdoor nut flush draw, and an overcard. That's likely good. So you want to ideally do it in situations also where you have some kind of outs lingering out there. If I had, something maybe like, let's say 5-9 or something, then I probably wouldn't be as eager to do that. But again, there's a lot of these opportunities, so just I would say you can play around with them and experiment. It's a little bit different, of course, when you're multi-way. This same logic doesn't apply. I'm specifically talking about heads up, especially if you open from the cutoff or the button, someone calls you from the blinds or whatever, you're going to get a lot of people just trying to basically re-steal, and you can apply a lot of pressure on them in those situations by just making a small raise. This is another kind of similar thing. Again, you don't see this a ton kind of at higher stakes because people know like there's a lot of BS going on. Usually ends up becoming a lot of leveling if these situations do occur, but you kind of have a low paired board and you know bet it and get check raise, especially check money raises. I would definitely advocate in position if you have around 100 big blinds or more that you're calling and either looking to raise the turn or bet if you're checked to. So in this case, it's simple. This person decides to check. And you can again make another small bet when the ace comes out and take down the pot. You need to be careful with this one and don't go overboard. I wouldn't advocate uh, triple barreling or anything of that nature. But again, it's something that you can experiment with. Most of the time on low paired boards, it's pretty much BS that people have something, or they might have like a small pair, like sixes or sevens, and you have a lot of different things on the turn and river that can scare them off. So yeah, in position if the pot's not too big and your stack to pot ratio is still, staying pretty, uh, still has a lot of room to play with, then calling and kind of looking to re-steal on the turn is a good play. And if worse comes to worse, let's say a reg is doing it against you, you start building a little bit of a history as well, and they know, you're going to be tough to play against when you have position on them. So, okay, so this one I kind of like to call my post-flop squeeze. You find the right board textures. This works great. I thought I had another good example of this. I'm sure I do, but I couldn't find it. But so anyways, you get probably likely a reg opening, a fish calling, and you have a fish that's kind of on the shorter stack side. You want to play this hand because you still um, have some value and getting some money over here. You don't have to go completely crazy if you don't hit anything against the reg, but you could potentially also bust the reg. So we flat call with 10 jack opposition. Now we have completely dry board, king high. It's going to be very unlikely that someone's going to hit this very well with a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw. So um, can lead at these pots, don't have to lead big, and now you are essentially squeezing the pre-flop raiser because they kind of have to have some kind of hand in order to go along. They have to be worried about the person behind them and so on. Most of the time, especially if you pick the right board textures, you're going to get folds in this spot. This particular case actually got a call, so um, was planning to actually make a small check raise here, assuming this person isn't going to have ace king a huge percentage of the time, but it gets checked through. So that kind of tells me they have either some kind of weak king, um, probably not so much an eight, just because the person was a little bit tighter. I'm not too sure what kind of read I had on them at the time, but definitely could have some other kind of pair like queens, jacks, tens, all that kind of stuff. Um, but there's no showdown value here. It's very likely we could have something like ace eight. We probably don't have ace king, of course. There's not a whole lot that we can rep beyond missed value for a set, looking for a check raise on the turn or something like that. But a huge portion of this person's range is going to be king X or something. So you kind of have to bet on the larger side um, to steal these kinds of pots. Um, but a majority of the time, really, the point of this hand is on the flop, finding good board textures where you start squeezing the pre-flop raiser. It's good, especially like queen high, and if you happen to get like a king or an ace or something like that on the turn, it just applies. There's just a lot of pressure that puts on the person to kind of have a big hand there. They're not going to expect you to be leading with this kind of hand, and the off chances when you hit some of your backdoor hands and they have something, you can win massive pots. So it's a nice play. All right, so this one I'd like to call my little big double barrel, and I almost hate even talking about this because I've been doing this for years, still not very many people do this, and I've worked with a lot of students and taught this, so and they've found great value in it. But essentially, standard open, standard C bet, except your C bet is really small in relation to the pot overall, and even different than your normal C bet sizing, which a lot of times will induce calls. Um, Now, sometimes you're going to get raises in this spot. Um, I would say, though, really at 50 no limit and below, you can exploit this a ton. 100, against some regs, you're going to get a few more raises and stuff like that, but there's a ton of other things to do, like continuing to call, or to 3-bet the flop, or just testing and seeing where someone's at. It's okay to like try something against a reg and see how they react. Sometimes you're going to be wrong, but if you don't try, you'll never know. So yeah, in essence, you're betting small. Now this isn't the best turn card to really double per se. But the idea right from the start was to bet small on a totally dry flop, looking like I'm trying to squeeze some kind of value, and then bet large. A lot of times, at least, really around the pot size, or sometimes even slightly overbet the turn. But you want to make sure it is a pretty dry board. If you get shoved on, you're not committed in any way or anything close to that. So yeah, so make a bet, get a fold, pick up the extra money on the flop by making that small bet, getting someone to call. So, you again, you want to make board texture is a big piece of it. You don't want to be doing it on really highly coordinated boards or things like that. But let's say it's like queen deuce four or something like that. I would do the exact same thing, small, um, and then very large, maybe slightly overbet on something like a queen high board, because it's very probable someone has ace queen, queen jack, um, queen, king queen, all that kind of stuff. So you really put a lot of pressure on them, and then if you do get a call, then you just start doing it for value. Um, that's how you really start to maximize your value. And as you know, and the reason why I'm kind of talking about some of this stuff is because most of the players you're going to be playing with are rigs, especially nowadays. Even at these stakes. So you want to make sure that you're trying different things against them, seeing how they react, and making good notes and exploiting them properly. So this one I like to call my naked flop float, and you need to be very specific about what kind of board textures and opponents that you're executing this on. My initial read, even though I didn't really have much on this opponent, was they were just um, looking to mix it up a lot, and so and with the board texture that comes out, I felt pretty confident that I could make a play on the turn. Um, if you're unsure, don't do it. Here, pretty standard open with king 10, and I get 3 bet from an aggressive fish. I'm gonna call with a lot of hands in this situation, and mostly also because they're gonna have a lot of hands. Now, kind of a little bit of the oxymoron with these kinds of opponents is they're gonna have a lot of hands. They're gonna do some stupid stuff. So you do have to um, until you get really good reads, you do have to make sure they're not going to be someone who's going to stack off with like, king three right here, or something along those lines. Um, you gotta at least hopefully have some kind of read that they're gonna fold a little bit. They're not complete maniacs and nutcases. So, here I'm obviously going to get a C bet from a ton of hands, and there's not going to be a whole lot of hands beyond queens and above, and someone who hit the jack that's going to continue on the turn. And this is what I was really hoping for is, getting the flush on the turn when I get check to standard bet, fold, scoop the pot. Um, I'm looking for ideally very coordinated boards that I can represent. That's not the most coordinated board, but there's some coordination, and it's helpful if there's like one single high card. Um, and especially in a spot where someone's going to be three betting light, they're gonna whiff those kinds of boards and are not want to continue, enough. If it's in a tighter three betting situation, then you need to not try and execute that kind of plan. So again, it's the situation and opponent, and definitely board texture that you want to focus on. Something like a 9, 10, 2 diamonds board, with whatever other card. Um, there's going to be a ton of scary cards that you can rep. Occasionally, you're going to rep the hand that your opponent has, and that is going to be part of bluffing. But more times than not, um, you're going to scoop pots from your opponents that you would have not been able to. So, okay, next. So this one I call my fried fish bluff. There's really two variations of this, but they are pretty much similar. I mean, essentially, you're making very highly profitable bluffs against fish in spots they're obviously weak, or they preferably had tons of different draws that they whiffed on, and you don't have to bet very much to steal the pot when you don't have anything at the end. So here, fish limps in, ISO fish, king high flops, standard C bet. Really, this is for value. Um, and get a call, check, going to check through on the the turn, and hoping to get another check on the river. And we get a check on the river, we know that either our fish has one of those three cards on the flop, or some kind of draw that missed, unlikely to have a flush. So we can represent a flush. In this spot, you have to bet a little bit on the higher end of what you would bet, because you want to get the fish off the 6 and the 4. Fish are fish, and they're stations for a reason, because they like to call bets, they don't like to fold. So, but you still can obviously get them to fold, but in this spot you need to bet a little bit larger. Something like a 8-9 board with hearts, and you get down to the end and they were checking and calling the whole time, then you have king high or something, you can bet a very small amount, a third of the pot or whatever, and just get them off their whiff draws really, really cheap. This one you have to go a little bit more on your higher end, like I was saying, to get the fold and scoop the pot. But fish are going to have something like 5-7, 5, 3, 5, like all sorts of different kinds of hands in a spot like this, and sometimes even ace high. So there's occasional time where you might even want to check down on certain boards. Um, just to not have to risk anything if you have the best hand. But there's a decent chance that your fish is going to have a 6 or a 4 here, and you want to get them off that. They're most likely going to call you if they have a king, of course. So, um, and when they do that, you'll lose. So this is another one of those fried fish bluffs, and I really just want to run through this real quick, because there's just kind of one major point I wanted to make. I thought was semi-important, but um, even though I'm not in ideal position here, when I see whales this bad, like my range is going to get super, super wide. Um, I really want to try and play as many pots as possible in position against these guys. Um, and the main point I want to make here is, when you have someone this wide, obviously you're going to be calling with a whole lot of gut shots and draws, the same kind of thing we were just talking about earlier in the other fried fish bluff. When I get the ideal double barrel card on the turn, I have to commit myself to tripling, assuming that I get checked to on the river. So I do get checked to. I want to make my bluff and get my opponent off of his, deuce, 6, or 3. So again, I have to bet a little bit on my larger side. Um, sometimes he's going to check the flush to me, but still most of the time people won't. So, you want to follow through once you do make a plan with your double, because that's going to be a hard bet to call once you bet all 3 streets, even for a fish. And again, sometimes you're going to have those fish that will slow play some kind of random weird 2 pair or something or another. It's gonna happen sometimes, but more likely than not, as long as you're capitalizing on the situations consistently, you'll take those down more than you'll get slow played. All right, kind of debated on even putting this one in here, but this is kind of my rope-a-dope. Uh, don't do this a ton, but there are spots when it'll come up, and there's a couple of situations of it here in these sessions that I played, but thought I'd go over one just because it's kind of funny. Uh, so, limp in the small blind, I'm going to raise with the pretty wide range here, Jack 6, pretty standard. Um, get lead into me, and if you remember earlier in this video, we talked about leading into pots like this is usually pretty weak. I have an overcard, and I have initiative in the hand, so I'm going to raise, In this instance, I get called, but I love seeing the queen on the turn. That's a great card because I know that I can represent that at some point in the hand. I don't have to necessarily rep it on the turn. Um, so I can check through here, and basically my plan is if I do get checked here, I am going to rope my opponent into making a dumb bluff because I know most of their range here is going to be a 3, a 4, some kind of busted straight draw or flush draw. It's going to be a huge part of their range. So I bet a very small amount. Um, with stack size, I have to be careful, so I have to bet really, really small here. If I get shoved on, I'm kind of obviously screwed, and oh well. But I'm hoping that I can get some kind of small re-raise that I can just shove back over the top. Well, in this case, I get that. It's an extremely small re-raise, so I don't have to worry about shoving. It just makes my job even easier. I don't have to make much of a re-raise, and I get my opponent to give up the hand. Just simply because, there's not going to be a ton that they're going to have here, maybe other than 10-9, and he's probably, especially with how aggressive he is, going to do something on the flop. So I would really start thinking through what someone's hand range is by the time they get here in this spot. This is a very profitable play if you're, thinking through everything and the possibilities of what hands I might have, the fact that I, have some initiative, and I am three betting the river. So, but there's a number of factors that you obviously have to really pay attention to and think through, including stack size, and that you're not messing yourself up. This was an ideal stack size going on, so you kind of have to be careful, and that's kind of why I debated even uh, talking about this one, but there will be spots where you can get this to happen against aggressive opponents, and it's a great way to just pick up extra money. Like I could have just bet there at the end, and he probably would have folded, but I like to try and pick up a little extra money when I can. It's fun like that, I guess. So here's a free money play. This is really pre-flop, and doesn't happen a ton really, especially at 100 and 200 no limit, but every so often you're gonna get some kind of limp parade, and you're gonna have some random hand. And even though it would be great if you were on the button, even out of position, raising and trying to get the hand heads up, or at least one player, so that you can have the initiative, follow through with a C bet on the flop, take down the pot, that kind of thing, is a winning play. It's something that, again, it's one of those small scooped pots that you want to make sure that you're consistently taking advantage of because they do add up at the end of the day. And if you're unsure of your kind of your raising size, you have to experiment a little bit for whatever site you're on, because definitely some sites, you could raise a very small amount and steal those pots, and some you're gonna have to go a little bit larger. So you kind of need to play around a little bit with where that median is. Of course, all opponents are going to be slightly different too, but there are some common themes, and you want to try and find those, but make sure that you are grabbing those pots. Sure, you could complete or something like that and then try and take a pot out of position against three players, but even against bad players, it's not ideal. You're not going to win that enough, but you will win it a ton pre-flop, and then you have some play post-flop. All right, so when you end up coming through the back door, you want to make sure that you take advantage of it, definitely against fishy players. Um, don't think I took advantage of it as much as I should have in this particular hand, but uh, this was, a decent spot, I guess. So, open raising, getting called this flop, gonna see bet, 'cause of course if I check, I'm not gonna be able to do much of anything. You know, turn my flush draw. Don't need to bet a ton still, because uh, I've had initiative from the start. There's not really a huge reason for this person to raise and get a call, hit my back door. Now I'm hoping that they have at least an ace, something that I'm going to get paid off or whatever. Really, in these spots, I advocate betting at least pot, sometimes over, and really balancing it with those times when you are over betting on the Turner River with bluffs. But didn't in this case, but still got my call to at least get my pot size bluff in there. But if I whiff on that turn, I mean on that river out of position, I don't hit the back door on that kind of flop, probably giving up because there's very few cards that I'm going to see that I'm going to be able to get them off of by the river. So, but the main point is when you do hit your back doors, you really want to bet large because they are much more surprising, especially on ace high flops. Get max value in those situations. This is one of those free money spots. I'm sure you've seen this a ton of times. You've probably even done it yourself. But multi-way pot, uh, king queen gets checked through. Flush card comes on the turn, still checked through. Inconsequential card on the river. Um, Unless someone had pocket sixes or maybe 8-6 or something, you are going to scoop this pot. Um, Ideally, it's better, when you have when it's multi-way with only two other opponents. The more opponents, the more difficult and the more successful it has to be. Um, but there are boards that come off like this, and especially on things like, let's say, a 9-10 or 10 jack board or something like that that gets coordinated and the pre-flop raiser checks that through and it gets checked through again. No one's going to be slow playing on those kinds of board textures, so you can oftentimes bet or check raise or something and steal those pots a huge percentage of the time. So you just want to be aware of those. The more coordinated they are and the less action that there are, because that will happen multi-way. Then those are pots that just nobody has anything, or no one's going to be looking to really take anything down. So the more coordination, the more checks equals the weaker the hand and the more free money available. All right, so hope you enjoyed the video and you got to learn a couple things. Basically, just experiment. If there's a couple things you saw in the video you want to try, play around with them, stay patient. Definitely, don't draw your conclusions too fast. Share your experiences with your fellow poker players and on forums and get feedback and opinion. And do things so that you're getting your opponents to have to think about a situation, especially your multi-tabling regs, because you'll find that if you do something that makes them have to stop and think, a lot of times you'll get a lot more folds. That's not necessarily the case with weaker players or fish. A lot of times, if you get them confusion can lead to curiosity, which can lead to more calls. So you want to be careful about that. But against your regs, do some things that get them to stop and actually have to go through and think about a situation, and you're going to find a lot more folds as well. So um, hope you're out there scooping a few more pots. This has been John Anhalt for Leakbuster. Take care.